Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for CEO Exclusive, brought to you by Anona Enterprises.
Good morning and welcome to CEO Exclusive, where we get emerging trends from CEOs and their most trusted advisors. I'm your host, Soyini Koch, and I'm really delighted to have on today's show Doug Rieder from Sterling Seacrest Partners. We're going to talk today a little bit about risk and what he thinks are the most important areas of risk that you as mid-market CEOs need to be watching out for. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Doug, what areas do you think mid-market CEOs need to be looking at, let's say, over the next year in terms of important areas of risk that you're seeing?
The biggest business risk that we are tracking at the moment include a pronounced, difficulty to find qualified labor. With the economy being as strong as it is and continued strong job growth, I think we're waiting on numbers this morning to the availability of labor to come into particularly some of the industries that we track closely, one of which is construction, which is, vital to Atlanta's economy. Everybody we talk to that is their number one issue. There's more work than they can handle. They could take on as much as they want, but they simply do not have the human resource capital to take it all on.
So you said specifically in the construction industry, I understand that there are a lot of people who left construction during the Great Recession and never came back. And so construction it's still trying to recover from that as well. What are you seeing in terms of how that the downstream effects of the labor shortage, and what are your clients doing to deal with the problem?
Well, I actually freshened up on some of the numbers. So before the show, we chatted about
I appreciate that.
And, one of the things that comes out of the data is there's a pronounced aging in the construction industry because when the last crash happened, a number of the younger folks, sought employment elsewhere.
Which is normal and wise of them.
Correct. And there was actually a pronounced uptick in the average age of construction workers. And one of the things that you see, one of the downstream effects that you see from that is just it's a physical job. And so we see more back injuries. We see more, workers' comp activity in general from a lot of our accounts because when you're trying to do things with, an average age of, I think 54 at the management level. So the field supervision people, that there's a pronounced uptick in risk that arises from that naturally, just because, younger people are more nimble. They don't have a problem getting up and down. And that's not always true of us in our 50s and beyond. So that's definitely a downstream impact from that.
And what are your clients doing to mitigate that?
You've got to double down on your safety culture. You've got to do stretching. You've got to
have yoga in the office.
You might be surprised at the number of companies that actually do pre-work, stretches. You also need to be more proactive in terms of planning activities. That's a big one that we hear a lot about in our clientele, in that, not every construction job and not every day is the same in terms of the activities that are going to be performed. And so a lot of our carrier partners are stressing pre-activity planning in the field. So, what scope of work you're going to be doing that day. And that's going to involve maybe getting up on lifts or getting on ladders or carrying heavy loads. Those things should be planned and discussed and the proper best practices refreshed before embarking on those.
What other industries are you seeing that are being affected by the labor shortage?
I mean, really, it's pronounced across the bigger cities that are booming, like Atlanta. We like to say in our business, there's a zero unemployment rate in the brokerage business. I mean, we literally, and I've talked to a lot of clients about this as well, and I'm starting to see it. We literally made a strategic decision to hire a full-time recruiter. And that simply stems from the fact that we've got certain growth goals that imply certain number of, increased headcount each year. And then when you factor in, just average regular turnover at the edges. You're constantly hiring and trying to find good candidates. And we're big on maintaining a consistent company culture. So we really,
that's a big word at CEO Exclusive. We hear it a lot.
well, to us, it's everything. And the more I'm in business, the more I think that's just universally true. Human capital is the most important to a business. There's very few exceptions to that. And so we absolutely feel like this is going to be one of the biggest no-brainers, just because it's a constant activity, and you need to have somebody focused on it and who's in tune with your culture, which you lose that a lot of times when you go out and try to use recruiters or outside resources that are part-time and not fully engaged in your company.
At what size do you think it's appropriate for companies to begin to think about that?
I think it has more to do with what your growth plans are and how does that translate into numbers of people that you need to add. And so it's probably not 25. It's probably somewhere, if you're up around, we did it when we have got 190 people, but the 190 people, when you do the math on our growth plan, that implies that we've got to hire like 20 new people next year, just based on what our, the best practice metric is for our continued growth. And so, that's a full-time job, clearly. And our HR resources that we had in place, who are very good, and we have only been in place for a couple of years, were quickly, overwhelmed by that objective. So it made really easy math sense from our standpoint. But what I've challenged companies to think about is, if you can't justify that today, but you do business with a friendly competitor or subcontractor, I do a lot in the construction space. So there's lots of relationships like that. I said, man, get with one of your friendly subcontractors and split the cost and share the resource. That's not a competitive, it's not going to be harmful to do that strategically. And we've seen it be really successful. One of my clients is growing at a really fast rate. They do a lot of tuck-in acquisitions, and they grow organically every year, and they've got a double-digit kind of growth objective. And they went from no human resources to a full-time recruiter and HR director in the last 2 years, and the results are just fantastic.
How do you? So this is a slightly different angle than I thought we were going to take, but it's very interesting. How do you get that person to really understand your culture well enough that they can begin to now replicate your vision for what that culture should be? Well,
in our case, we're going to expose our recruiter to the entire company. We're going to have her spend time with different teams. We're going to fully engage her. And we've got her in some committees that will get her exposure to different groups and how they operate, because in our business, we've got sort of salespeople, we've got client service people, and they do different tasks day to day. So there's a different, skill set, different personality characteristics. And so, I don't think it's that complicated. I mean, I think this individual needs to spend time with those people. We spend a lot of time talking about our values and our culture in, different meetings and forums. And our plan is to just, fully immerse her in all those opportunities to get in tune with the culture.
All right. So I want to dig in here. So what are your cultural values? What are they?
Their transparency, their fairness, their objectivity. We're actually rolling out a mission, vision, and value statement next month.
All right.
So this is stuff that we've been working on, but it's not officially rolled out.
Ooh, breaking news.
In terms of a formal, product yet, but we're big on treating people with respect and, assuming, we talk a lot about assuming good faith. And so we deal with different trading partners and stakeholders, people call them. Our employees, our carriers, our clients, and we interact among those just all the time. And it's really important that we be transparent in those dealings, and we be fully disclose, presenting full disclosure at all times. That's a that's a knock in our business, that sometimes people play games about trying to get somebody to do something they want them to do by not necessarily putting all their cards on the table. And it's really a big corporate value for us that we don't operate that way. And to the extent that we would determine somebody is, we're going to part ways. Mm-hmm. We're big on, regular communications with our employees, but it's the fundamental principles are probably transparency, fairness, good faith mm-hmm. in all that we do.
And one curiosity that I have, though, is your understanding of what fairness is might be different than another person's, or even your recruiter's understanding of what fairness is. So how do you break that down into the behavioral characteristics, or do you, right? So that your understanding of what your cultural values are now becomes the understanding of this person.
And I think that's probably why we say transparency so much, because that's one in our business where we go out into the marketplace, we secure a lot of data and a lot of information about a client's business operations, and we present that to various carriers to make insurance proposals back to us and to mm-hmm. our clients. And so the fairness and transparency sort of go hand in hand. That's a big deal mm-hmm. in terms of, being transparent with all that you've uncovered,
right?
And presenting hopefully some solutions, or, to the extent that there are issues that need to be addressed going forward from a risk standpoint or a risk management standpoint, we're going to confer with the client on those, and we're going to make unified recommendations to the marketplace as to how we're going to operate. And we hold ourselves accountable to that. So there's a lot of data that's kept when we transact with carriers and with clients. And so, part of that measuring fairness, I guess, is, the transparency piece goes hand in hand, and the accountability on all that is also an integral part.
Yeah. So this is for the CEOs who are listening, the reason why I'm kind of probing here is that we talk a lot about culture. It comes up on just about every show, right? And this idea that you have these cultural values and that they need to be transmitted to the 190 people that you have, the 20 people that you're going to hire, and then the 20 people that you're going to hire the next right. year, like all that, right? So getting that into some sort of a repeatable, now scalable process is really important to you. And then also the CEOs who are listening to the show, who say that it's a constant process of learning. And so this idea that you have a thought or a process on how you're going to translate your cultural value of fairness and transparency, and how you break that down into something that is measurable so that you can communicate it effectively to most especially this person who's now responsible for transmitting it to the 20 people, to choosing the 20 people.
Right.
And then making sure that they come in and they can adjust and conform is the reason why I'm asking about it.
And that's something that doesn't happen overnight, right? It's going to take a little while to get this person totally immersed in all of those things that we view as important, but it's not something you can snap your fingers and make happen. You've got to expose them to the culture. You've got to talk to the culture. And you've got to show them that these people that you're trying to, educate on it, that you mean it. And so it's not just talk, you've got to actually execute. And so, we've got checks and balances on things. We talked about accountability. I mean, one of those things is, auditing processes and making sure that people are, adhering to the values that we speak to, right? Transparency and accountability don't just happen. You've got to show that you're actually doing those things and measuring those things and checking on those things. And we've got processes in place, I think, to do that.
Great. So let's go back to construction.
Okay.
And the shortage. So so we talked about other industries, and you're saying that you're seeing the labor shortage show up other places. Are there other effects that you're seeing from the labor shortage, either in the construction industry or other industries that you think our listeners should be paying attention to?
Well, I work most frequently myself in the construction space, so that's where I've got the most direct firsthand knowledge. And one of the downstream effects that you would observe from from a shortage of labor is an increased cost. We're seeing that and we're hearing about it. There's also cost input pressures coming from other areas too. So commodities, some commodities are being pressured. But the labor piece is a big one, and it translates into projects cost more, and which ultimately translates into some of those projects will not get done because the financial or the economic motivation cannot be met by the increased costs. And we see that when projects get delayed for various reasons. Maybe the owner is pursuing financing, for example, and it takes 6 to 12 months for that to sort of solidify. Literally, the pro formas can blow up over that course of time because of the inflation in the construction inputs, and we're seeing that. I mean, I had a partner tell me about a project that had that occur just recently. It's definitely impacting and will impact. And it's a natural phase, right? I mean, we're late in the economic cycle, so it's a natural phase that'll cause things to slow down at some point, at least in that space.
Great. So listeners, we're talking to Doug Rieder from Sterling Seacrest Partners, a risk and insurance expert. And you mentioned the economic cycle. Any thoughts on what you think 2019 is going to hold in that regard?
Well, again, I'm most familiar with construction, but I think a lot of this applies across our portfolio because our business is really strong, and that's 100% correlated by the fact that we, our business is determined by how well our clients' businesses are doing and at what kind of growth rate they're growing at. And universally across our, portfolio, the business activity is very strong. From our standpoint, we don't see 19 being a significant downturn. There's a lot of our, for example, the construction projects have a long life cycle from start to finish, from concept to completion is a long time. Many times it's years. And so when what we look at a lot of times with our clientele is what is their backlog, that is their uncompleted contracted work, would be a way of phrasing that. And backlogs are at historic highs, and which means that 19 is not going to be a problem.
We can coast for a minute.
We can coast for a second, and the current work will carry our clientele through 2019. It gets fuzzier after that because most of our clients' average job takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. And so, that's a little bit of a fluid concept across a portfolio of customers, but by and large, our point of view is that 19 is going to be strong. The construction economy drives a lot in Atlanta, so I think Atlanta will continue to be strong through 19. And so we're looking, any slowdown we see is probably out further than that.
Oh, well, that's good.
So, I mean, our point of view is typically 12 to 18 months, and 12 to 18 months looks really good. So we're blessed to be in this market.
All right, very good. And then for you and your business, you recently had a merger. Yes,
we did. Yes.
That's also always of great interest to the CEOs listening to the show. So, how did that affect your business? We actually had one of your partners on the show in 2016.
Great.
John Miller. And how did that work, and how did that affect, for example, the culture that we were just talking about a few minutes ago?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I like to dispel when we talk about this is that, people from the outside see us growing and making a transaction like this, and it looks like, oh wow, you're really growing fast. And we look at it and say, no, we were engaged on that for at least 5 years. We had been talking about that company. It was a peer firm, Seacrest Partners out of Savannah, is the firm we're discussing. And they were somebody that we really respected in the marketplace, and they were connected with some trading partners that were consistent with ours, some carrier relationships that were common where we would see each other at different functions. And just their reputation for client service was really high. And so we had discussed them as a possible, merger candidate many years before it actually happened. And so for a number of years, a lot of our work in that area was just, we need to get to know these people and see if there's a common cultural fit. And we feel like that was the biggest thing that we're proudest of in hindsight, is that we hit that on the button. There were certainly things that we went through, and they probably made the lion's share of the technical sort of structural changes internally. But because our model is very consistent and fair, and when I say fair, I mean everybody has the same set of rules. And in a brokerage business, that's important, because you can sort of build us and them mindsets if you don't have that structure. And they certainly had to make adjustments coming over to some of our structural setup. But once they did, and they realized we don't have any kind of hidden agenda, those things came and went very quickly. And the synergies that have come out of it have been really good. We've got a lot of people working across what were legacy separate offices and doing deals with clients in a team-oriented approach that's really been cool to see. And so we view that as that deal is just an absolute home run for us. And we're very pleased to have those folks as partners. And we operate now as under the name Sterling Seacrest Partners. So we felt like they had such brand equity in their markets that we didn't want to walk away from ours, and we didn't want to walk away from theirs. And it may not flow off the tongue as well as some names will, but we really like it that we ended up there.
Mm. And as you were looking at the culture piece of it, how did you communicate the kind of the, not just the merger, but the core values of this new entity to the new group of people as a community?
Through town hall meetings and, lots of meetings and personal interaction. We spent time doing road shows kind of in different locations and talking through and having open Q&A sessions with the folks that participated. And, really, it's not that complicated. I mean, we just sort of operate in a very straightforward way. And sometimes people are suspect of that when they first engage, particularly in a situation like this, where technically, we looked at it very much as a merger, but technically, we were the bigger of the two firms. And so there's a little bit of a hesitancy maybe on the other side to say, well, these guys are really buying us, or whatever you want to call it. And we worked hard as a leadership team to sort of dispel all that and to say, no, we brought you guys in as partners. We view it that way. It's a merger. And getting through those early days was really not that difficult. I felt like it was very rewarding too, because we had some folks that clearly had angst about the deal. And, 4 or 5 months into it, they circled back with me and with other folks on our side and basically said, I couldn't be happier. You guys have honored everything you said you were going to do. And that's really what business is about, is working in a fair and honest, straightforward fashion. And if you do that, it's very easy to sleep at night, and it's very easy to build a good culture, I think.
Great. So as you look into 2019, is there anything new and exciting that you want to let our CEO listeners know?
I don't know how new or exciting it is, but we're insurance geeks. So, we're one of the trends, you talk about trends, one of the trends that we've been tracking and been involved in quite a bit in the last 2 years, particularly is the incidence of distracted driving and the claims results that are coming out of that. That's probably the most noteworthy insurance trend right now. And it's been going on for a while, but it's building momentum because the carrier community has gotten to a point where they are pushing forth significant price increases. And so that's not only just if you're a transportation company, like a trucking company, which has been pronounced, but anybody with any kind of meaningful fleet exposure. So, 10 plus vehicles that are, on the road regularly. we're seeing double-digit price increases come from that. The state of Georgia recently passing the distracted driving bill that you heard a lot about last summer is a sort of a symptom of that trend across the country. I think there's 27 states that have now done something like that. And we like that because it raises the profile of the issue, because one of the biggest things that you could look, and when you do your analysis of that, is to realize that you got to start talking about it first. And when it becomes illegal, everybody's talking about it. And so it's really something that's fixable and manageable, which is good. But you absolutely have to talk about it. You have to train on it. You have to, be conscious of it at all times. As a boss, you need to make sure you're not planning conference calls with people that are driving. There's just a lot of things that you can do to manage it, and it's very much financially rewarding to do so, because your carrier is now pushing forth penalties for folks who are having a bad auto loss experience. In other words, a lot of claims activity, and we insure a lot of fleets. And I would tell you, hands down, the most common accident we see is following too close, which is generally an outcome of a distraction. Reaching for keys on the floor, talking on the phone, texting, all that stuff. It's eating. It's not just related to your phone. And the fact that this trend is getting more coverage is really a good thing, because it's probably the most significant cost increase factor coming through the insurance market right now. That could change with all this storm activity. I have not studied that yet, but the fires in California were mainly an insurance event, so that's going to be billions of dollars in losses. So we could see some impact from that over the course of 19, because the property market's been fairly benign the last several years. We've had some storms, but it hasn't been. Some of the storm activity has been mainly flood, and that's not really a big insurance incident when that happens, because that's a federal government issue. So the property market's been fairly benign, but we're starting to see some potential for some firming there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And lastly, we didn't talk about this, but the other big issue that we see from a risk standpoint right now is the baby boom generation is the primary owners of most of our clients, and most middle market businesses in general, I would imagine. And one of the things that we're seeing right now that's a challenge from a risk standpoint to them and for us as advisors to them is just a turnover in ownership that we're seeing in private companies. We are constantly addressing that with our clients, and that's just got risks by its nature, right? You're taking longtime managers who've run the company potentially for decades, and they're trying to figure out a way to sell it to internal folks, or sell it to a third party, or sell it to a private equity buyer. All of those things have different risks endemic in them. And so we try to stay abreast of that as it's occurring. And we would absolutely point to that as a big business risk trend and it probably will be for the next decade. Mm-hmm. By the nature of it, the demographics of the baby boom generation turning over ownership and leadership in these companies.
Great. Well, thank you. Listeners, we've been talking to Doug Rieder from Sterling Seacrest Partners. It's chairman after its recent merger. Thank you so much for being on the show, Doug.
I appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to CEO Exclusive. I'm your host, Soyini Koch, and I hope you have a profitable, productive, and very prosperous week. Thanks.
This show is brought to you by Anona Enterprises, where strategy is your access to money and performance. Learn more at AnonaEnterprises.com.